Well, hello and welcome to this Deeper Walk webinar. My name is Nick Harang, and I'm really glad you're able to join us today, whether you're catching the recording after the fact or here with us live on this Wednesday morning. We are going to dive into a topic that is something that we hope you'll find very helpful as we talk about complex trauma. Now, the fact is that every one of us has experienced trauma in life. We've all been wounded by things that have left a mark, and we need to find some help to process those things with God and with God's people to experience healing and the freedom that God has for us. But some of us have been so deeply wounded that there is what we call complex trauma. That's where there's multiple layers of trauma that are combined that really create some challenging situations and require some special tools and perspectives to help to get to the bottom of and find that lasting healing and freedom. So today we are going to have a conversation with some experts on complex trauma, some ladies that have been ministering to people for many years and to some of the most shattered hearts and lives, and seeing God do some tremendous things to bring restoration and recovery and healing. So we are excited to jump into this webinar with you here in just a moment. I do want to mention that we are a donor-funded ministry, and so we are so blessed to be able to bring a lot of free resources to the church, to people all around the world. And if you'd like to be a part of that, you can check us out at deeperwalkinternational.org. And there's a little donate tab at the top. If you feel led to be a part of helping these resources equip the church and reach more people that are struggling, then we would love to have you join us in that. But today, let me go ahead and introduce our facilitator for our conversation. I am joined by our president of Deeper Walk, Dr. Marcus Warner. Hi, Marcus. How are we doing today?
Doing well, Nick. I can't help but notice that we've got 4 people in 4 different time zones today. It's the beauty of technology, right? So I'm in Indiana. Alaine, what state are you in? You went to
Colorado.
Colorado. Is it? So what's the weather like in Colorado today? I mean,
72.
72. Okay, well, that's awesome. How about you, Melissa? Where you checking in from?
Kansas, and we're a balmy 82 today.
Ooh.
Wow. And then, of course, Nick, you're in California. What are we doing in Northern California these days?
It's only 60. I'm feeling a little left behind here.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, we're like 30. So, okay. We're good here.
In Indiana, right?
I'm in Indiana. Yeah. We still got pockets of snow, different places around here. So we're good. I am going to Texas tomorrow. So this is, I'm looking forward to that. That'll be nice. Well, we do have a kind of a deep topic here as we talk about complex trauma. So I just want to make something clear up front. So, and that is that Deeper Walk International is a discipleship ministry. We're not we're not a counseling center with licensed mental health professionals. So we're kind of coming at this topic from that discipleship perspective and from the perspective of ministry. But having said that, Alaine, you got a PhD in Christian counseling, and I know you're a licensed counselor in Kansas. And so some of the things that we talk about here, we want to talk to people who've got experience, who've got some education, who know some of these things, but we are talking about this from a kind of a ministry perspective. And, my own journey on this is what I found is that very few people get into this because they want to. Most people find that they are thrown into it, either because it's their own life experience and they're trying to figure out answers for themselves, or because someone showed up on their doorstep and they had to figure out what to do with this person who had deeper, problems than they'd ever run into before. So that's where we're going to be going. Nick, did you have anything else before I start?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to introduce you guys because not everybody's met you. And for those of you new to Deeper Walk, you just heard from Marcus, our president, who's been serving in that role since 2006. Before that, he served as a senior pastor and other ministry roles. And he's written over a dozen books on everything from neuroscience to leadership to marriage and family, as well as how God brings healing to wounded hearts. And we'll share a couple of those resources with you later today. And I also wanted to introduce Alaine Pakkala. We're really blessed to have this incredible woman of God joining us today. She spent nearly 30 years ministering to hurting people. She's got a ministry called Lydia Discipleship Ministries that we'll share with you a little bit about later. And she's been used by God to help people with some of the most complex trauma out there and people with dissociative issues, and has an equipping ministry to help train others know how to effectively see healing come to those with complex trauma. So thank you for joining us, Alaine.
Thank you, Nick.
And then we have Melissa Finger, who you heard from briefly, coming from Kansas today. She is the founder and executive director of the Trauma Healing Center in Kansas City. And we'll share her website and how to find her ministry later as well. And she's worked as a biblical counselor for more than a decade, helping clients both nationally and internationally as they heal from complex trauma. She's written several books on complex trauma and healing as well, and spoken at dozens of events and workshops around the country. So again, very blessed to have these ladies who are real specialists and really gifted people in this really important area. So thank you for joining us, Melissa.
Thank you, Nick.
All right, well, I'm going to hand it over to you, Marcus, and looking forward to hearing this conversation.
Yeah, well, I am looking forward to this too. I don't get to dive into these conversations that often with people with this kind of experience. I know for me personally, one of the things that we found at Deeper Walk is our founder was Dr. Mark Bubeck, who wrote the books The Adversary, Overcoming the Adversary, which is now Warfare Praying. And one of the things we found out as we began training people to do spiritual warfare ministry was if you hang out a shingle that says we deal with demons, you are going to get complex trauma, right? You are going to get stuff that, because what we found is that somebody comes and says, I think I have a demon. They have usually a whole lot of other issues going on underneath. And not to minimize that part of it, because they need help and people need help with that. And that's why we do the training. But what we found is that that's rarely the only thing going on. We have multiple layers here. I remember, Alaine, the first time I heard the word complex trauma, or the term complex trauma, I was at a Lydia Discipleship Ministries was sponsoring a DID symposium in Colorado Springs, and you had invited Heather Gingrich, Dr. Heather Gingrich from Denver Seminary. And I know she had written a book on this idea of complex trauma. I thought, well, that's a really good term because it covers an umbrella of things from PTSD to DID to borderline and, all these really complicated issues. So as we dive into this, why don't we just start with that question? Can both of you give me kind of an understanding of what, when you hear the term complex trauma, what does that mean to you? And we'll start with you, Alaine.
Well, I think complex trauma is the difference between a traumatic event versus a lifetime of trauma. And especially when trauma starts at a very young age, the coping skills that the child has to have to be able to survive that can really end up with giving them a lifetime of needing emotional healing. When someone is at war and comes back with PTSD, the difference, or the different category, it is complex trauma, but the difference is that that person's trauma happened in a relatively short period of time. It may be repeated trauma, but as opposed to that, it's years and decades that the trauma has been occurring.
And when we're dealing with complex trauma with people like that, we shouldn't expect this to be, 1 or 2 sessions and you'll be all better, right? This is like, it's taken a long time to get here. It's going to take a while to get out. Melissa, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Alaine described there. And I would add in just the complexity of it is because it's a lifetime of trauma, like all these different trauma things have happened and they all kind of get tangled up. So it's not like you can say, well, this happened to me and, A equals B, or like, see, A equals B, that's complex trauma right there. 1 + 1 = 2. It doesn't really work that way because it's so complicated, which is why you can't work through it in 1 or 2 sessions, because there's just a lot of sorting to do and kind of understanding what happened, which isn't always clear from the get-go.
No, yeah, it is one of those things. I remember describing it as one person sitting in front of me when I was a pastor came in with this lifelong time of pain. I just felt like I was somebody was handing me a bowl of spaghetti noodles. You're like, which one of these noodles do I pull out first here? Because they have so many like categories of problems, let alone experiences of problems that are going on here. So as we dive into this, now we kind of understand where we're going. How did you get involved in a ministry like this? Alaine, you want to tell them a little bit about your background and some of and then how that, and then your passion and calling for helping people?
Sure. Well, I came from a DID SRA background back 45 years ago or so. It was called DID or MPD instead of PID. But I grew up in a family that was active in the occult. So there was, in addition to the emotional response to abuse, there was also the spiritual bondage that was there. And the Lord kind of had to bring freedom to the spiritual areas and also bring healing emotionally. And out of that came a real passion to develop resources to train people to help, especially within the church context. And the focus of our materials is to prepare people to minister to even the most shattered, those with DID. And it does come from a discipleship model. We used to have ministry centers that did counseling, but as people have retired, why those have been retired as well. So we really focus on leadership training. And the resources, I think, like all of us, the Lord has used our past to put us in unique places of ministry. That's true for everybody. And I think it's been helpful in providing resources to come from a clear understanding of what it's like to have DID and what might be some appropriate things that need to be attended to.
Well, I love some of your the simplicity of some of the titles in your resources, like, you're not going crazy, and you have some really you do a nice job of connecting with people. I think you called your book Taking Every Thought Captive, like pre-discipleship. Like, we got to get people up to a certain level before we can even begin the real discipleship process. So I just love the simplicity that you brought to a very complicated thing in your training. And it's probably true of all of us at this point in our journeys. We've got 20, 30 years of working with people, but most of what we're doing these days is trying to equip other people to multiply the effect, this. So Melissa, tell us a little bit about your story. How did you get involved in complex trauma?
Yeah, I feel like if you're involved with this, you have a story. That's just kind of how it goes.
Yep.
But I graduated with my master's degree in marriage and family and was looking for an organization to kind of get involved with right out of graduate school. 14 years ago or so. And it was truly the Lord that kind of guided me and landed me somewhere. And as it turns out, that organization worked a lot with DID. And so graduate school doesn't prepare you for that, as most people know who have been through that process. But this organization, I just kind of got a firsthand look at it and was able to work with people. My mind is very strategic. That's just one of the giftings that God has given me. So I could just see how the Lord has crafted that. DID is looked at as a mental health disorder, but I see it as God's coping and equipping for severe trauma. He never wanted trauma to happen, but he made a way for people to survive it and to deal with it. And just the beauty of that kind of drew me into, I want to help these people be able to see that beauty as well, and then also receive healing.
No, that's great. No, so Melissa and I got connected when I was invited to go speak at the Colonial Presbyterian Church in Kansas City, right? And you were involved with Kim Jones there and doing leading some people through some deeper walk material. And so
I am a big fan of deeper walk material because kind of what you mentioned about Alaine, it's so simple. I mean, the complex topics like warfare or narcissism or other things that we could go down, anxiety, depression, and making it really simple. And so, we've done a lot of the trainings through deeper walk here.
Very good. Well, I always tell people, when I first saw your book, I noticed in there that I was cited a few times, and I don't know why that still makes me happy to get cited, but I'm like, it's pretty fun. So, we're talking about a deep topic here, and it's so vast. It's like, how do we make this helpful for people? How do we, just help them wrap their heads around it? So let me start with the idea of defining a few terms here, right? We've thrown out SRA, we threw out DID, we threw out dissociation, we thrown out. Why don't we define some of those? Like, what is SRA, Alaine?
Well, SRA and also RA, ritual abuse. SRA is satanic ritual abuse. They're both forms of complex trauma. And in SRA, there's usually a pseudo-religious context to it, worshiping of Satan. And if you look in the Old Testament, the idols that were worshipped there had a specific way they were supposed to worship. And if you read through those, it's like a grocery list of what SRA still is involved with. Very brutal, very sadistic. And RA may not have that satanic component. Obviously, the enemy is behind both. But one of the things is that both are organized trauma. In other words, people purposely get together to specifically perform things, whether they're rites or whatever. But also the factor of repetition is important, that in both RA and SRA, it's not just a one-time thing. There's a regularity sometimes about it that makes the abuse and the effect very cumulative.
Yeah, that's true. Anything to add there, Melissa? Or
No, I think she covered it actually quite well.
yeah. Well, and, there's also, I think, a connection. You think of what the Nazis were doing in some of these concentration camps. And while it may not have been in a religious setting, they were following some of the same kind of things of how do you create, because when people do this on purpose, a lot of times they're trying to create slaves, aren't they? They're trying to create people that they have that they can control in some way or another. And so you see this in, and one of the things I found that's really kind of very sad is that, because I travel all over the country, is I've yet to go someplace where someone hasn't said, this is a real hotbed for SRA. I mean, this is not like a localized problem that just happens here or there. It's like everywhere I've gone, someone has come up to me with a story. And so it's important. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to get some resources out there. So part of what we're doing today is trying to introduce people to the good resources that are available, as well as having a conversation about this. Now, not all complex trauma comes from ritual abuse, right? So what are some other sources of complex trauma? Can you give us like a scenario that might, somebody might not think of immediately as complex trauma?
Well, I think of one thing, and that's neglect.
Okay.
Neglect can be complex trauma, as well as incest, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and even emotional abuse at an intense level. Those can all be examples of the trauma that comes from the complexity of the abuse.
Yeah, neglect. I was talking to somebody who grew up that way. And one of the things that happens with neglect is you also get this element of where you have to be a parent when you're still a kid. And so you miss your childhood because you've got to take care of yourself. You got to survive, right? And then sometimes you got to take care of brothers and sisters. And sometimes you've even got to manage, you got to manage your whole family as part of your survival. And so there are a lot of factors here that people don't necessarily think about right up front. What else comes to your mind, Melissa, when we go down here this road?
I think of with complex trauma, sometimes that can happen when you have different traumas that just kind of keep hitting one after another, kind of like you're, out in the ocean and the waves keep coming in and you don't quite recover from that last blow and the next blow hits. To be all that large, trauma is anything that overwhelms us, that is emotionally difficult for us to process. And when you can't fully recover and then another blow comes, so maybe you lose a parent at a young age, and then before you can recover from that, you hit middle school and all of the trauma that can sometimes come with middle school. And then before you know it, you're graduating and you're out on your own. And so these things may not seem big in and of themselves, but if you can't find solid footing in them, they sure do stack up to be pretty complex.
Yeah. So when we talk about trauma, we're going to define, if we define trauma, you said something interesting that I just want to make sure people catch, and that is that, I overwhelm my capacity, right? You want to talk about that a little bit more? What do you mean by overwhelm capacity?
We all have a certain amount of capacity that grows God designed us for our capacity to grow over life. So as infants, we have a very tiny capacity.
Yeah.
And as we have new experiences and we do really hard things and figure out we can do them, that capacity grows. And as it grows, we can handle bigger things. So I can handle something much bigger than, say, my 9-year-old daughter could, because my capacity is much larger. So trauma is anything that is just a little bit bigger than our capacity to handle it. And so that can be different things for different people, but that's where capacity fits in there.
Yeah. So basically anything that overwhelms our capacity is trauma, but then there is like severe trauma. And what happens with severe trauma is I don't go just a little bit beyond my capacity. I am like light years past my capacity. Like nobody could handle this. And that's one of the things that creates things like dissociation. So why don't we talk a little bit about dissociation in this? How would you describe what dissociation is, Alaine?
Well, it's a brain overload.
Yeah.
It's the communication between the different places in the brain and the neurotransmitters that are involved. Even in the flight or fight kind of a scenario that most of us have experienced. I was working at Glen Erie, which is a castle in town, an estate for the founder of Colorado Springs in the 1860s. And when I was sitting quietly on a bench in one of the flower beds I was fixing, I suddenly saw this bear come around the corner. And at that point, your mind goes, flight or fight. What should we do here? And that's a natural response. But what happens is when there's such an overwhelm, the brain decides that I can't deal with this. And whether it uses in its own mind the word insane, the feeling is that my brain will just explode if I live through this. So it takes the memory and puts it away from the conscious mind.
I remember in your book, Laura, right? You used an expression in there that stuck with me, that you felt like going through this yourself, that you felt like you'd become a professional forgetter, right? And I thought that was an interesting way of describing dissociation. It's like your mind wants to forget this ever happened as quickly as possible, right? So what are some things people do to try to forget the trauma that they go through?
Melissa, do you want to?
There's a lot. I think there's many tools that we use to try to forget. And in the context of dissociation, one is minimizing it. So it wasn't that bad, so-and-so had it worse than me, or, I saw the news and that was horrible. Justifying it. Well, they really had good intentions, kind of making it more about the perpetrator, the abuser than themselves. Just telling your own self that it wasn't a big deal to the point that I don't need to remember it. Like I'm kind of dumb, degrading myself. I'm stupid for this even being a big deal.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Go ahead.
I think that an important point too is that it isn't a conscious forgetting, in that you don't find yourself thinking, this is too big for me, so I think I'm going to forget. It's an automatic, dissociation is an automatic thing. And so the memory goes away from the conscious mind into the unconscious. I'd like to define the unconscious mind as where we go when we sleep. Because obviously we're not conscious. There must be a place in the brain where other activities go on that we're not aware of when we're asleep. And so it's an automatic forgetting that then at the right time, the Lord begins to bring the memories back and moves forward in the process healing.
Okay. So, when I was first introduced to dissociation, there was somebody, sitting in front of me who went from being a 40-year-old lady to a 3-year-old, right? And all the mannerisms of a 3-year-old, even to the point of sucking their thumb and curling up. And you just see the transformation. It's hard to miss, right? But there are some other subtle things that can let you know. Now, help us understand the difference between dissociation and dissociative identities. Again, not for diagnostic purposes, just for understanding. What are some differences between dissociation and dissociative identity? Melissa, you want to start with that one?
Sure. So dissociation is on a spectrum. And at the lowest end of that spectrum, we all dissociate. So the classic example of that is the car ride home after a busy day at work, and you get home and, gee, I don't remember that drive. I hope I didn't run any red lights.
Yeah.
What we ask ourselves, right? So dissociation just happens kind of when our brain is multitasking and doing different things, and we can do an automatic process like driving. Without much thought about it. But then as you go up that dissociative spectrum, then you kind of hit a place where a middle place, we'll call it, where that overflow of memories happens that Alaine described. And it's like I'm dissociating the memories. I'm blocking them out. I don't want to think about them. I don't want to remember them. I'm kind of pushing them back. And then we get up a little bit higher on that spectrum of dissociation where it is different identities. And another way to think of that would be different belief systems. So it's more than just, oh, I'm torn whether this is a safe person, a safe relationship, or whether I should get out of it. I don't know what to do. It's completely separate beliefs. This person is safe. I love them. They're good for me. I can't be around them. They're not safe for me. And it's the same person. And you can kind of fully exist in both belief states without any overlap. And that's the higher end of that dissociation.
Okay. I like the way you phrase that, the idea of different belief systems, because, and that can be really confusing when you're first talking to somebody, because you hear the diametrically opposite things coming out of their mouth. And it contributes to their feeling like they're crazy or insane, and what is wrong with me? Because it's like 1 minute they love Jesus with all their heart. The next minute they think, he's the devil and the devil's a good guy. Right. So those are pretty radical belief systems to change, even to the extent of like, you can have internal parts that are male and female, right? You can have internal parts that believe differently about all, basically, if you can believe something different about it, it can happen inside when the DID gets in the picture. Anything you want to add to this, Alaine?
I don't think so.
Okay, there we go. We have, beyond dissociation, which is one of the things we focus on the most. And I think it's partly because what we found is that people who go through complex trauma, it's a very common for them to have dissociation as part of what they're dealing with. What are some other things besides dissociation that people might find themselves dealing with when in regard to that complex trauma brings up in their lives? What other types of things might we want to be aware of?
Well, I think one of the characteristics of complex trauma in general is that it's interpersonal. In other words, it's relational. It very often involves other people. And so because of that, like Melissa was describing, relationships are very difficult. Even if there isn't the extreme of DID, because of the how would you say it, the connection with the past that is now seeping over into the present. So you may be having horrific relational problems, and you might not even know why, because you're reacting on two levels. One, you're reacting to that person or that situation, but also it's triggering something in your mind that may be an intense emotion that you haven't connected with the actual trauma. And so it's sometimes confusing, and it's difficult to figure out complex trauma by yourself because it has rabbit trails in it that are part of the situation. It's not a very clean cut complex situation. And so sometimes it's very difficult in trying to find help because you're not really sure, what should I be shooting at? What should I be aiming at? What is the main problem here?
Yeah, that's a good point. What do you want to?
Yeah, just to kind of tag off of that there, Alaine, that confusing part. I think there's a lot of confusion for people who struggle with healing from complex trauma and it goes back to that overflow kind of into the unconscious mind is I'm having all these feelings, but I don't know why. Why does this color bother me? Or why did that situation make me feel anxious? There's no reason for it. And so that confusion and not understanding how my past connects with my present, I think is a big source of confusion, and then can lead people to really being very indecisive is another thing that I see with complex trauma. because what decision do you make when your feelings are telling you something and your mind is telling you something, and it's all kind of connected, but you don't know how. Just that confusion and that indecisiveness.
I think too that not knowing yourself is part of it.
Yeah.
We have a discipleship class we had for years, specifically for DIDs, and part of it was to help develop skills, just normal life skills. And we used to do a section on what do you like, or what do you like to do for recreation, or what color do you like, or any of that. And there's just a blank because their control in situations of trauma has been lost. They are controlled by someone else. And so they really don't know even the basics of who they are, even in likes and dislikes.
Yeah.
No, that's really helpful. I had a conversation with Dr. Wilder, who's also going to be at our conferences at the end of the month. And he was talking about how people have varying capacities to return to joy from specific emotions. And so one of the things we find with trauma is that a specific emotion can get triggered and I turn into a different person when I feel that emotion, right? And so when that emotion gets triggered, I can have a completely different belief system. I can have a different value system. I act like a different person. And in dissociation, that can be in dissociation. It can also be in problems that are like, I think clinically called things like borderline personality, whatever, where they have a hard time where even though I may not turn from Bob to Sally, it's like I don't act like myself. And because of that, I don't have a core identity that I return to on a regular basis. So this, which raises this question. So what is the goal here? What is it we're trying to shoot for as we, get into this whole direction of how do we even define healing and what is the goal? What does it look like? So can we start with you, Melissa?
Sure. I think that question varies by person, because when people come in to see me or when I'm meeting someone and they're trying to figure out what services they need, their definition of healing can be very different. Some people just want to feel stable in the moment, and I want to be able to function today. I want to be able to remember things. I want to be able to, be in a healthy relationship, but I have no idea what that looks like. I think the bigger picture for healing is always about maturity. I feel like the Lord is growing us through all of us, dissociation or not, every person. God is growing us. He's maturing us. He's taking what the enemy meant for a curse. He's turning it around to say, okay, let's learn together. Let's do healing together. And so for me, when I work with people, my goal is how can I connect you with the Lord? Because I feel like if you're connected with the Lord, He's going to grow. I don't know what kind of healing you need because I can't see inside your soul, but the Lord knows. We'll set your goals and we'll work towards your goals, but then let's see what the Lord knows that you need and kind of work towards that. So it's kind of vague, but maybe to some. To me, it's pretty specific.
Yeah. So they may have one goal that they're saying, I want to accomplish this, but in the back of your mind, you're thinking our ultimate goal here is we want to grow your capacity. We want to help you grow your maturity. And then there's a lot of strategies, tools you use to get there, but that's kind of what I'm hearing is.
Great summary. Well said.
All right. Very good. How about you, Alaine? Anything you'd like to?
Well, in the DID context, I think that's an important question because some counselors are familiar with the word integration. And what that means is that the isolated places where memories reside in a person's mind come to a place where there's a cohesiveness there. And I like to use the phrase where every part takes its rightful place. They're not eliminated. It's just that we come together as a whole. And some counselors feel that that's the goal. I think I would disagree with that because to me, healing is more than integration. It's more than being able to keep a job and all those other skills that are needed. But I think healing is connecting with God in an intimate way. Mm-hmm. And that's where healing, counseling, discipleship merge together, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think one of the things that makes what we're doing discipleship as opposed to like mental health professional stuff is that our ultimate goal here is to get these people connected to Jesus. So what we want to do is remove the obstacles in their life that are keeping them from having peace in their relationship with God, so that, because none of us can sit here and heal anybody, right? So there's not like a, hey, just here's the magic pill, here's the magic thing, and everything will be all better. Our goal is to try to help for ourselves, right? And that is, we want to be able to connect with Jesus in more and more emotions and bigger emotions, be able to take those bigger and bigger emotions to him, so that I have a relational connection with Jesus in all of this. And so I like to think that that's a large part of what makes this discipleship, and that we are helping them get a biblical worldview. So they have what we do want is like an integrated worldview, where they stop turning into completely different belief systems with every emotion that they feel. But I agree. It's like a long time ago, somebody would ask, are you trying to get, like a part in a person would ask, are you trying to get rid of me? Right. Probably had that question, are you trying to get rid of me? I'm like, no, I'm not trying to get rid of you. I'm trying to help you all be a family, right? And to work together as a family, and to get on the same page so that there's unity and peace inside.
Marcus, if I could just be more specific in terms of the three focuses, or I guess, is that foci? I don't know, hippopotami.
Close enough. We'll go with foci. I'm not foci. I don't know.
Okay, whatever. In helping people find healing, number one is helping them connect with God the Father, not just Jesus, but God the Father. And secondly, to teach them practical skills to access scripture for themselves, because the word has to be so central during the healing process, not, beating people over the head with it, but the truth of the word. And thirdly, teaching people how to be spiritually aggressive, so that they don't end up falling back into situations that would further retard their healing.
Those are all great points. We're getting close to wrap up and Q&A time. And I will say, we got hundreds of people online. We had 1,600 people sign up for this thing, which tells me, one, there's a lot of trauma, right? And it's one of those sad realities that this kind of training is necessary, but it is, because there's just so much of this out there. And the first thing everybody wants is, can I meet with you? And so what we've got is, that's probably not on the table, because I know neither one of you are taking clients specifically. But what kind of tools and resources do you have within your satellite that you'd like to let people be aware of? Like, here's some resources, training, even referral network or anything like that you might be able to make us aware of here. I know, Alaine, you've had 30 years of building out these resources. Let's start. Can you tell us a little bit about Lydia Discipleship and what you do?
Yeah, the emphasis that I mentioned before is training people to help. And so it's involved in leadership training, whether it's professional counselors, lay counselors, pastors, men. And I was thinking about what should I mention, because we have leadership resources, and then we do have resources for people who are experiencing DID healing. And so I decided to mention 4 that relate specifically to a person who's in the healing process themselves. We have about 20 on our website, what are called tiny talks. And these were 5 to 10 minute recordings that I did, MP3s, as if I were talking directly to a person with DID. And they relate to pertinent topics like fighting against hopelessness, how can I speed up my healing, things like that. And another resource that's very unique, and Dr. Joanne Wolf was one who worked with me to put it together, and that's an interactive website called Abby's Safe Place. And it's a Swiss chalet, and the goal of it has interactive rooms, a shepherd's room where you can connect with the Lord, a kitchen that is dedicated to resources about relationships. And also in that, there's a place to belong. There's even you can draw a picture and put it up on the refrigerator, but you have to have Abby the cat look at it first to make sure that it's not going to scare anyone. But just it fills the need, I think, of a place to belong for DIDs. And secondly, to have appropriate discipleship materials there. So I'm always excited about that one.
And where do they find Abby's place? Is that?
It's Abby's, it's a cat, ABBY is a cat's name, abbysafeplace.com.
Very good. And Melissa, what kind of training resources and things would you like people to be aware of?
Well, here in Kansas City, we have the Trauma Healing Center, which we are developing to help people find resources. And we believe it's really important that people have more than one source of support, especially when they have complex trauma or DID, dissociative identity disorder. It's important to have a counselor, prayer minister, a support person, just different things. Sometimes you need financial training, sometimes you need marriage classes, and not all of those things are available to every person, but it's important to start where you can. And so what we offer are personal assessments where you can call and one of our trained professionals will set aside an hour, and there's no charge for this, to talk to you and to help you figure out what resources you might need. Locally, we have a lot of resources. If it's someone that's not local, we could provide a list of these are things to look for in your area that will help you on your journey. And just encouraging people not to kind of get in your head, this is the one thing I need to get better because so-and-so went through this process and they're amazing, so I want to go through that process. It's like, well, we're all wired a little different, so let's see what the Lord has for you. And just helping people hone in on a personal journey for themselves.
Yeah.
Marcus, if I could just put a little PS, I forgot to mention on Abby's Safe Place, if you can be patient with us, we're migrating it to a new platform. So some of the links aren't working as well as they did before, but if you're patient with us, that should be done pretty soon.
Well, that's good. And I know you do have training. When you talk about leadership training, you're not really talking the same way, like the Rare Leadership Training book that I read. You're talking about people who are leading others through this process, right? That's
right.
Yes. So I just want to make sure that was clear, that people understood. She's not talking about how to be a pastor. She's, or how to be run a business. She's talking about how do you lead people through their healing journey resources, and they do have some excellent ones. So, so we wrap up here. We got a conference coming up at the end of the month, Friday, March 25th, Saturday, March 26th. I'm going to open it. Chris Corsi is going to speak on Friday night on the importance of a healing community and relational skills, and this whole idea of emotional capacity that we were mentioning before. And so that's going to be Friday night. And then Alaine and Melissa, you two each tell us a little bit about what you're going to be discussing on Saturday. Yeah, Melissa, what are you going to be talking about Saturday?
Sure. I'm really excited about what I'm going to share on Saturday. I'm going to open with a really hard topic, a question that almost every person with complex trauma comes within their heart in some fashion, that has to do with suffering and kind of the purpose of suffering, not the purpose of suffering. I don't really like how that's phrased, but more two categories of suffering and how the Lord has kind of uses them differently. So we're going to start with that because I feel like you got to understand suffering before you can resolve your conflicts. And then we'll kind of move into inner conflicts. And when you've got, whether it's just the broader, I really don't know how to resolve these conflicts because I never got these skills, or whether it's dissociation and I've got two entirely different belief systems. What in the world do I do? And what do I choose? How to work through and resolve those.
Very good. Very good. So, Alaine, what topic are you going to be covering with us?
Well, it's under the general topic of human trafficking, but we're going to be focusing on the issue of challenges to ministry to those who experience familial trafficking. And as bad as it sounds, that's when the child is trafficked by the family members. And I have to say, in 30 years of ministry, probably, I don't know exact statistics, but probably 95% of those who I've ministered to have come through familial sex trafficking. And probably one of the most poignant statistics is that of the people that have experienced that, 65% of the traffickers in their family was their mother.
Wow. Yeah, that will mess with your psyche, won't it? That will do some damage. We have, so you can see we're covering some pretty deep topics. That's why we're calling Ministry of the Deeply Wounded here. And the day's going to wrap up with me having a conversation with Dr. Jim Wilder. He's in the midst of writing a few books right now. And so he said, I'll participate, just don't ask me to prepare something new for this. I'm like, fine, let me just have a conversation. He's agreed to do that. So I'm excited about that as well. As we wrap up, let me invite Nick back. I know he's probably doing 5 things at once right now, but Nick, whenever you're free to come back in. Also, for those who didn't know, some of you might know that Melissa, you got a connection to Stephanie Hinman, right? Stephanie wrote the book Building Bounce with me about how you grow emotional capacity. What does the game plan look like for living with more joy? So what's your relationship to Stephanie?
Yeah, Stephanie and I have known each other for several years, but we are actually doing the Trauma Healing Center together. So I'm the executive director. She is our program manager. And so she's helping to put the programs together, and we're serving our community.
Excellent. Yeah. I just wanted to be, for those who know Stephanie, I wanted to make sure they knew that connection.
Absolutely.
All right, Nick, I know you've been managing the chat room and trying to get slides up and all the rest of it. So,
and getting to listen in a bit. Fascinating conversation. And in the chat room, several people said, wow, my mind is blown. This is explaining so much, or this is so helpful. And some people testifying to the healing work that they've already seen coming out of SRA or other complex trauma backgrounds, and just testifying to God's grace and the journey they've been on. We just want to say thank you for joining us today. We do have some time for Q&A with our wonderful panelists. People are like, oh, Alaine's amazing. Melissa's amazing. This is so great. So we are glad to introduce them to you, for those of you that haven't met them yet. And we will be sending out an email tomorrow with the recording, so you can watch this again. You can share this with friends. You can find their websites, where we'll put those slides back up in a little bit. And we'll also send that out in the email tomorrow, so you'll have direct links to find all these resources. But let's take a few questions. We'll get to as many as we can. And Grace asks, can complex trauma result in schizophrenia symptoms?
Symptoms, or one of the things we have to be careful of here is we're not in a position to diagnose things. So when it comes, especially comes to technical clinical terms, we have to be a little bit careful, because that's not really who we are, what we do. But in terms of symptoms, yeah, you can clearly get symptoms that are on that spectrum of what's describing schizophrenia. Me personally, I have no idea what causes schizophrenia. That's not something I've researched. So I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on it, but. Okay.
I want to comment on it. Okay. And again, just the scope of this webinar is limited, so we hope you understand that. And there are resources out there that can hopefully help you. Somebody asked this question. They said, are counselors and meetings and sessions and tools enough to receive healing and maturity? Or how much do you think there's a need for spiritual family relationships and day-to-day belonging and connection? How do those two things fit together, of community and therapy?
I would use the word vital. I think they're vital, because, we're a whole person. We're not segregated into, these are the spiritual parts of our life, and then these are the more everyday when I'm washing dishes or whatever. And the healing that sometimes needs to happen is often focused on an issue of, even as a tiny baby, not bonding with a caring adult. So to have a caring adult, or having people in your church who are caring, that can really move you ahead much more quickly in the healing process.
I agree that they're vital, but I would also add in that not everyone is ready to have all of that all at once. And sometimes there's aspects of the trauma that need to have some healing before you're able to have a healthy relationship, or even, safe people can feel very unsafe because they're safe when you have complex trauma. And so while the belonging and spiritual environment is absolutely vital to that goal of healing, not everybody can start with that or have that. And so I feel like You got to be where you are in your journey and not feel like, oh, all these pieces are vital, I want them all at once, because that may not work for everybody.
Yeah, no, I was also jumping in on this. I distinguish between breakthrough things that you can do and journey things that have to take place. And most of those dramatic breakthrough stories happen with a counselor, with a prayer minister, somebody who is working with you to get rid of a demon, working with you to have Jesus meet you in a memory. But if that isn't followed up with the journey kind of things, which involves belonging and building those other kinds of relationships, we've often seen those things not stick, right? We've often seen that the breakthrough things, they don't keep their breakthrough because they don't have the rest of it going, where they're building out their capacity and getting that belonging in place. And that's why we're using words like vital. Like at some point in the journey, that needs to happen.
That's really good. Somebody wrote, as the spouse of someone with complex trauma and DID, are there resources available to us to help support them?
Not a ton, but not a ton. That's I think what was I think there was one by a guy named Doug, right? That you had for a while. Is that still available?
I know that's not still available.
Okay.
We work at, it's called For Better or For Worse.
Okay, For Better or For Worse. It's the only book I've come across on it, For Better or For Worse. Is it still available at the website? I think Lydia DM is that .com .org.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I know of a lot of specific resources, but what I usually recommend to someone is talk to a counselor yourself, because you need support as well. And to know some of the tools, how do you use empathy? How do you validate? How do you connect when there's walls against that? You may need your own support person, maybe not regularly, maybe once a month or something, but to help kind of walk and talk you through your side of that process.
Yeah, I find it's a little bit like the struggle in the pornography thing, and there's a whole lot more programs for somebody trying to break free of a pornography addiction than there are for the people who are betrayed by the pornography addiction. There's just way more resources on the one side than the other, and there's a need for it.
Yeah. And just a note, we do have time for a few more questions. There are some in the Q&A window. If you're typing questions in the chat window, I can really only manage one at a time. So go ahead and type in your questions in the Q&A window. We'll get to a few more here in the remaining time we have. One of those is Bill asks, what are some of the key indicators or symptoms of complex trauma?
That's a good question. Well, so the symptoms or indicators of complex trauma tend to be that I feel overwhelmed regularly. I often feel like I'm can't manage life. And when I look back on my history, there are either large blanks in my mental history as I think back on my life, or when I think back on my life, most of it is traumatic. I don't. And so I tend to start with the story before I start with the symptoms. And that is, tell me your story, and you can listen to the story. You're like, and so sometimes you're helping people understand, that would mess up anybody. You're not a bad person. So I've personally, I've been almost more story-based than symptom-based when it comes to trying to figure out what's happening with this.
When I look back in the history of a person's life, I think the issue of unexplained things is important, because whether it's currently where you lose time, or there's unexplained things, you blew up at the pastor and you really like him, but you don't know why you blew up at him, or responses where the intensity doesn't match the event, so that emotionally maybe it's just a little mosquito, you could just hit it with a fly swatter, or a number 2 emotional intensity, and you're using a number 10 big mallet to smash it, so that it's just unexplainable to you.
And kind of with that unexplainable, I would say not understanding always what's going on internally. So of course you've lived with yourself your whole life, so there's a lot of things you probably think are normal that you'll find out aren't. But to have an emotion and not know why, or to have a thought that just comes out of nowhere and you're like, I believe that, or hear yourself say something and be like, what, did I just say that? I didn't know I thought that. And so just confusion with again, back to what Alaine said earlier, who am I? And kind of surprising yourself with that sometimes.
That's really helpful. Well, someone asked, what about people that are helping others deal with their trauma and experiencing secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, et cetera? What do you recommend are some best practices or resources to take care of the helpers?
It's not so much a resource as it is a strategy, a couple of them. But when I've asked the Lord when I'm speaking with someone, if something is going to come at me by way of a memory where they're going to say a level of trauma that I myself don't have the capacity to deal with, I've asked the Holy Spirit to sort of give me a heads up as they're talking. So as someone would be talking and I would sense, oh, I think I know where this is leading, I do the same thing that I do when people are complimenting me. Like at a conference, say, oh, that was really good. You know, that was what I try to do is sort of put up a mirror in front of me so that in both cases, the praise that I'm receiving is reflected up to him, but also then in the other context, the pain and the horrificness of what they're telling me sort of bypasses me, and it goes to the one to whom it's important that he hears and understands. The other thing would be to, if a horrific memory is coming and the person is so shamed by it that you hit a barrier because they just can't even speak of it. It's so shameful. I again ask them, would you be willing to show the Lord that picture in your mind so that they're again connecting with him about that? And sometimes those kind of strategies the Lord individually can give you can help you to sort of stay steady in the midst of hearing all the sewers of the enemy.
Great. Those are great tips, because I think that's secondary trauma, overwhelmed by someone else's trauma is a real thing. And the other thing I would add into that is community, finding some kind of community for yourself as a counselor, whether it's other counselors or people that can pray for you. They may or may not know or understand complex trauma, but they can support you and you can support them in kind of that professional capacity can be super helpful. And then the other thing that I see most commonly, really with counseling, but kind of goes anywhere, is when we're taking on more responsibility than we should. To me, that's a red flag for me. If I tend to get a little bit overwhelmed in a situation, it's like, okay, God, am I taking on responsibility for this aspect of this person's healing that maybe you're supposed to handle and not me? Because I kind of be all of it, but and kind of deferring back to the Lord to say, okay, God, that you need to work this out for that person. I will be here and I will be the hands and feet of Jesus for sure, but I can't take responsibility for whether someone else is able to make progress or not. And so I think we have to assess that in ourselves constantly, really, and just being close to the Lord really helps refine us as the helpers just as much as it does the people that we're helping.
Oh, that's so good. Well, let me just remind everyone how to find Alaine and Melissa's ministries. We will send this out in the email tomorrow with the link to the recording. So if you don't have time to write down this website, that's okay. We'll send it out tomorrow. And Melissa's there at traumahealingcenterkc.com. Some great resources to look into. And I do want to mention that Dr. Marcus Warner has written a couple books on how God brings healing to wounded hearts. So our number one bestseller book from Deeper Walk is Understanding the Wounded Heart, because it is so simple and so practical. I know Melissa and Alaine have used this, and we have counseling centers buy just cases of them and hand them out to clients and use that as a primary tool. And he's also written a very short book just explaining a brief introduction to what is dissociative identity disorder, or DID. And I remember reading this a few years ago, and just like, this is just helpful. It's just an entry-level understanding, some stories, some hooks to kind of hang some things on. And so if that's something that might be helpful, you may want to look into that. You can find it at our bookstore. Just go to our website, deeperwalkinternational.org, and at the top, you'll see our bookstore link there. I want to let you know a couple ways to go deeper practically. One is that this coming Monday, we actually have an interactive live small group starting with a licensed professional counselor named Erica Daw, who's been taking people through deeper walk materials for years in her home state of Nebraska. And now she's going to offer this live Zoom class, 90 minutes a week for 12 weeks to walk through the book, to talk about it in community with other people. She said that when married couples sign up together, they get a common language and they get begin to process some of these things together in the marriage. And sometimes that isn't possible, but any individual that can come, any couple that can come, wherever you're at on your healing journey, this is going to be a super great opportunity to not just read a book, but discuss it, begin to apply it, and begin to really go on a deeper dive. So you can find that at our website under online events, or just /deeper-dives. Again, this will be in the link tomorrow. And then again, just a promotion, just a few weeks from now, you're going to get a chance to hear from Melissa and Alaine again, as well as a few other friends of the ministry, Jim Wilder and Chris Corsi and Junie, and of course our president Marcus. So this is going to be a really rich time where you're going to get just a broader and deeper exposure to some of the concepts related to ministering to people that have experienced these things. So I hope that you can join us for some of these things. And we as Deeper Walk are grateful for all the people that feel called to support this ministry with your prayers, by spreading the word to pastors and leaders and Christian friends that there are a lot of free resources on our site. And then, of course, some of our events, we do charge for, because about half of our funding comes through donations and half through product and event sales. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Marcus. Anything else you want to say before we wrap things up today?
Yeah, I just want to thank both Alaine and Melissa. Thank you guys both for joining us today. And as you can tell, each one of them could have an 8-hour seminar today, and we still wouldn't exhaust the subject. And so our goal is just to introduce you to people who have resources, people that you should know, so that you can get in touch with the training and materials that they have. And because it's a big topic, and we just want to be helpful along the way. So thank you guys for joining us, and thanks everyone who joined us as well online today.
Thank you.